Hi, I'm Kate Glazebrook. I work for the Behavioural Insights team in the UK. And for those of you who are familiar with our work, you might have assumed I'm about to talk to you about a study that looks a little like this, where we take a population of people, we split them between 2 or more groups, and we run an intervention and test what worked. And you'd be right, because the kind of main game of what we do in the Behavioural Insights team is running randomised control trials. And indeed, since we started as part of a small unit in the Prime Minister's office in 2010, we've run something in the order of 260 randomised control trials on pretty much every area of UK domestic policy. But I'm not here to talk to you about a randomised control trial, and I'm not here to talk to you about things we've done to other people, or at least to the UK population. I'm here to talk to you about a different type of experiment we ran on ourselves. So what was the problem we were here to solve? It was this one. So this is a very experienced audience that I don't need to tell knows a fair bit about this problem. This is a standard CV I pulled from Google of our good friend Andreas and what his CV might look like. And I've just pulled out a few of the things you might be picking up from the very first part of his CV. So you're learning a little bit about his gender and his ethnicity from the photo. You're also learning a little bit about how attractive you find him, which subconsciously or otherwise is picking up. From his bio, you're also getting information on where he lives. So you might be inferring something about his socioeconomic status. You've even got his specific age, and thanks to some bizarre things that happen in Europe, you've even got his marital status. It's not entirely clear why that's relevant, but nonetheless you have it. Now those of you who are American might be saying, well, that's all fine and dandy for people over there in Europe, but we don't allow most of this information to go on our CVs. And that's true, but you do always have name, and you do always have things like when people graduated school. And I'm sure most of you can relate to the fact that when you see a CV, it's very hard not to do an inferred age from the time that they graduated high school or finished their first degree. And you've also got some explicit things, like where he went to university and how prestigious it was, and something about his attainment level. Now, we were worried, as many of you might have been, and Danny Kahneman spoke to this last night, about the problems that we might have with all of this salient information before you've gotten to any of the body of whether or not Andreas is going to be good for the role. And we were worried about that too. So this is what we started to do about it in the Behavioural Insights team. And very quickly, or rather 7 to 9 hours into a process that me and my colleague Theo went through last year when we were doing recruitment into the team, we discovered that this is quite painful. Rubbing names off CVs by hand and then photocopying them several times because we were keen to do the wisdom of the crowd and get independent assessments still seemed like a pretty hazy process to us. And we weren't alone. This is a collection of headlines just over the last year on people who are increasingly concerned with diversity in our workforce and the biases that might be affecting people's ability to get jobs. So what we decided to do about it was to create a new tool. Now, the Behavioural Insights team typically spends its time poring over the academic journals, writing literature reviews, providing policy advice, and as I said, running randomised control trials. And yes, we did do those things, and we have written a report which you can get online on what we think the behavioural science says about recruitment and selection. And we ran trials, including to increase the racial diversity of police officers in the UK. But we quickly discovered that organisations don't have the time to read through our literature reviews, and most of them just want a simple solution. So we've come up with Applied, and I'm really excited to talk to you about the very first results that we have on testing Applied versus the CV method. So what did we do? In the Behavioural Insights team, we were looking to hire a grad round, and we accepted 700 applications from graduates across the UK and Europe. And we made them do a multiple choice test. That whittled them down to 160 candidates that passed the bar. And what we chose to do was run parallel processes. We put them through a pretty rigorous CV sift using 3 people in the team, where they scored their CVs based on the things that we looked for. They were done independently, I should say. We also put them through Applied, which was the tool that we've discovered and put together, spent a year putting together the things that we think Danny Kahneman spoke to last night. How many people do you need to optimally assess a candidate to ensure that you don't risk chucking out your best candidate? How do you ensure that they view and experience information in a way that mitigates the risk that they'll be biased? How do you mitigate against the risk of halo effects by chunking information and allowing people to assess things horizontally rather than vertically? And importantly, exactly what are you testing them on? What is predictive, or as close as we can get to it, in the literature of what works for finding a good hire? So that was what we put them through. We put them through both of those processes. And the successful ones from both of those processes came through to a rigorous assessment centre, to a final interview, and then ultimately a bunch of them got an offer. Importantly, what this allowed us to do was to create 3 different groups. So we had candidates that came through because their CV scores were phenomenally good. We had a separate set of candidates that came through because their applied scores were phenomenally good. And then we got a 3rd group who would have come through whichever method we had used. And these are our results. These are fresh off the analytical table. We just got them in 2 weeks ago, in your first group to see them. So this is a scatter plot that shows you on the x-axis what their score was on applied, and on the y-axis how they performed in the assessment centre. Those of you with good eyesight might be able to see that it looks like there's a positive correlation there. And in fact, for us, we were quite surprised at quite how positive that correlation is and the statistical significance of that regression line. But the real question is, great, so applied scores are a good predictor of your ability to do well in an assessment centre, but what about CVs? This is what we saw. Now, don't overinterpret. That line isn't statistically significant, and those of you who are analysts in the room would like me to tell you that basically that's just saying that it's as good as random. So the CV scores we had people give them gave us no information about who was going to be good when we brought them into the assessment centre. And this is what we saw in the final interview. Further proof, again, statistically significant positive correlation between your applied score and your ability to perform well in that final interview. Again, 3 assessors in that interview independently assessing using the best methods of structured interviews, and no relationship between the CV score. Small samples, but no relationship nonetheless. Now, this is interesting, but really from an HR perspective, the question is, did we hire different people? So these were the final 12 people we gave an offer to as part of our graduate group. And I'd like you to just have a think about the information I just gave you and give yourself an estimate of the likelihood that we brought in different people. Turns out 60% of the people we ultimately hired would have been chucked out under a CV sift. And importantly, of our best 5 performers, 3 of them wouldn't have gotten through had we not used applied. Now, this is a methods panel, and this is one experiment done on ourselves, so it's important to note that we should be replicating this. But for us, this provides important and compelling research that suggests we can be doing a lot better just by applying some basic behavioural science to hiring. Thank you.